I never expected my life to collapse in a single night. But that's the thing about betrayal, it creeps up on you, disguising itself in normalcy, wrapping itself in the routines of everyday life until, suddenly, the mask drops. And when it does, you realize the truth was there all along, hidden in plain sight. It happened during what was supposed to be a happy occasion, our annual family gathering. The house was filled with laughter, the scent of grilled steak drifting from the backyard, and the sound of my daughter's giggles as she wrapped her arms around me. "Daddy, stay with me," she whined, clinging to my leg, her small hands tightening their grip. I chuckled, ruffling her hair. "I just need to grab something from the kitchen, sweetheart. I'll be right back." But she shook her head, her face suddenly serious, almost scared. "Please," she whispered, barely audible over the chatter of our guests. Something in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. But I didn't listen. I gave her a reassuring smile, pried her hands off, and made my way to the kitchen. That was my first mistake. The second was opening the door. What I saw on the other side rewrote every memory I had of my marriage. There, in my own home, my wife had her hands all over my best friend, her fingers pressing into his lap, gripping him through his pants pocket. She wasn't laughing, wasn't playfully flirting. No. This was something else. Something practiced. Something familiar. The moment my shadow fell across them, my wife turned her head, eyes locking onto mine. But instead of shock, guilt, or even panic, she smirked. "Well, look who finally decided to see the truth," she said, her voice dripping with something between amusement and disdain. Then, with a casual shrug, she added the words that would haunt me for years. "I've been cheating on you for years, and you never even noticed." I barely registered the gasp from someone behind me, or the way my own heart seemed to stutter. My breath hitched, my mind struggling to process the weight of her words. But the final blow wasn't from her. It was from my daughter. "Daddy," she whispered, standing behind me now, her voice small, resigned. "It's true. We already know. He's been like a stepdad to us." The world tilted. My vision blurred. And before I could think, before I could react, before I could even breathe, I turned and ran. Out of the kitchen. Out of the house. Away from everything I had ever known. As I sprinted into the night, a single thought crystallized in my mind. If they thought I was gone, I'd let them believe it. But not for good. No, I had a plan. A long game. Let them think I had disappeared. Let them think I had nothing left. And when the time was right, I would return. And they would regret ever betraying me. The night swallowed me whole as I ran, my heart pounding so violently that I thought it might burst from my chest. My breath came in ragged gulps, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My mind was on fire, replaying every single moment I had spent with my wife, now tainted with the truth. Had it always been a lie? How many times had she come home late and kissed me like nothing had happened? How many times had I tucked my kids into bed, thinking we were a happy family, while she was out doing, God knows what, with him? My best friend. A sick laugh bubbled up from my throat, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't funny. This was my life. My family. My reality crumbling in real time. I had no destination in mind, only the need to escape. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs begged for air, until the weight of what had just happened forced me to stop. A gas station. That's where I ended up, standing under the flickering glow of a fluorescent sign, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. The cashier, a teenage kid with tired eyes, barely looked up from his phone. I needed a plan. I couldn't just vanish. Not completely. No, I needed them to think I was gone, but in reality, I would be watching. Calculating. Biding my time. I dug into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I had a couple hundred in cash, enough to get by for a while. My credit cards? Useless. If I used them, they'd know where I was. A thought struck me. I walked inside the gas station, straight to the small rack of prepaid phones. I grabbed one, paid in cash, and stepped back outside. The cool night air helped clear my head. If I was going to disappear, I needed to do it right. I dialed the only person I could trust. Hello. The voice on the other end was groggy, confused. I had forgotten it was late. It's me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. Then. Jesus. What's going on? You sound like. I need a favor. A heavy sigh. You in some kind of trouble? I hesitated. Yeah. The kind I can't talk about over the phone. Another pause. Then, where are you? I looked around. The gas station was on a deserted road, the kind of place no one really paid attention to. I'll send you the address. I hung up and texted my location before shutting off the phone completely. I didn't know how long it would take for them to notice I was gone. Maybe my wife thought I'd come back, tail between my legs, ready to beg for answers. She didn't know me at all. I was done being the fool. I was done being the guy everyone pitied. If she wanted me gone, fine. I would disappear. But I wasn't gone for good. I was just getting started. I sat on the curb outside the gas station, the cheap prepaid phone burning a hole in my palm. My mind raced through the next steps. I couldn't just disappear without leaving some breadcrumbs, just enough to make them think I'd lost everything. A pair of headlights cut through the night, slowing as they neared. A black pickup truck. Right on time. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped the only person I trusted in this moment, Mason. Mason had been my friend since college, the kind of guy who never asked too many questions but always had your back. We had drifted apart over the years, marriage, kids, work, but I knew I could still count on him. His sharp blue eyes took me in, and his face twisted in concern. Man, you look like hell. Feel like it too, I muttered. What's going on? He asked, crossing his arms. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I need to disappear. Not for real. Just enough to make them think I'm out of the picture. Mason's brows furrowed. Them. My wife. My kids. My best friend. I spat the words out like poison. They've been screwing me over for years, and I was too blind to see it. Now, I want them to feel what it's like to lose me. Mason let out a low whistle. Damn. I nodded. I need to stage it right. Make it look like I've hit rock bottom. Like I have nothing left. Mason was silent for a beat, then rubbed his jaw. You're serious about this? As serious as I've ever been. He let out a sigh. All right. I can help. But if you're doing this, you need to go all in. No half measures. I know. Mason motioned for me to get in the truck. Let's go. We'll figure it out. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I glanced back at the gas station, the last place I would be seen before I became a ghost. And then, we drove off into the night. The hum of Mason's truck filled the silence between us as we sped down the empty highway. The streetlights flickered past, casting long shadows over my thoughts. I had spent my whole life building something, a home, a family, a future. And in one night, it had been ripped from under me. But if they thought I was going to roll over and accept it, they had another thing coming. You got a plan? Mason finally broke the silence, keeping his eyes on the road. Yeah, I said. First, I need to disappear, make them believe I've hit rock bottom. I want them to feel like I'm gone for good. Mason nodded. And then? I stared out the window, watching the darkened trees blur past. Then I come back. But not as the man they used to know. I'll be someone else, someone they never saw coming. Mason let out a low whistle. All right. But if you want this to be believable, you can't half-ass it. You need to sell the breakdown. I know, I said. That's why I need to burn the old me to the ground. Mason didn't ask any more questions. He knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't bluffing. We drove for another 20 minutes before pulling into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered weakly, barely illuminating the parking lot. It was the kind of place where people checked in under fake names and paid in cash. Perfect. Mason killed the engine. This should work. No cameras, no questions asked. I'll cover your stay for a few nights. You need to figure out your next move. I nodded and climbed out of the truck. The air was thick with the smell of cigarettes and regret. Inside, the motel clerk barely glanced at me as he slid a key across the counter. Room 107. Mason handed me a wad of cash. This should keep you afloat for a bit. I took it without hesitation. I owe you. He shook his head. No, you don't. Just make sure whatever you're planning is worth it. I didn't respond. Instead, I took the key and stepped into the dimly lit hallway, my footsteps echoing against the stained carpet. The room was just as I expected, cheap, dingy, and lifeless. A single bed, a flickering lamp, and a TV with bad reception. I dropped onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I would start planting the seeds. The whispers of my downfall would begin. But tonight, I would let myself grieve. Not for my wife. Not for my so-called best friend. But for the man I used to be. Because by the time this was over, he would be nothing more than a ghost. The first thing I did the next morning was ditch my old life. I left my wedding ring on the motel nightstand, staring at it for a long moment before shoving it into the bedside drawer. I wouldn't need it anymore. Then, I went to work making sure everyone thought I had truly lost everything. I used the prepaid phone to send a few cryptic text messages, to my boss, to a couple of friends, even to my wife. Nothing desperate. Just enough to sound like a man on the edge. I need some time. Don't look for me. I lost everything. Maybe it's better this way. Tell the kids I'm sorry. Then I turned the phone off and tossed it into a dumpster behind the motel. By now, they'd be panicking. My wife would be telling her lover that I had lost it, that I'd run off. My boss would probably be calling around, wondering if something had happened to me. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed them to believe I had crumbled. That I was out there somewhere, broken, hopeless. I needed them to start living their lives without me, to believe I was nothing more than a fading memory. And while they were busy moving on, I'd be setting the stage for my return. I couldn't just vanish into thin air. That would raise too many questions. Instead, I needed people to see me spiraling. To believe I had become a shell of the man I once was. I found a thrift store and bought a few sets of ragged clothes, nothing too dramatic, just enough to make it seem like I was struggling. A worn hoodie, some tattered jeans, an old pair of sneakers that had seen better days. Then I took a bus to a part of town where no one would recognize me. Somewhere close enough that word would spread, but far enough that my family wouldn't stumble across me by accident. I wandered the streets, sitting on park benches, keeping my head down. I made sure to be seen, but not too much. Just a man who had fallen on hard times, blending into the background. I overheard whispers. Did you see that guy? Looks like he used to have money. Yeah. Sad, isn't it? Life hits some people hard. Perfect. I wasn't invisible. I was a ghost haunting the edges of their world. And soon enough, the rumors would reach the people I wanted them to. Mason was handling this part. He had a buddy who worked in law enforcement, someone who could subtly feed the right information into the system. Nothing official, just whispers, just rumors. A report of a man matching my description wandering aimlessly, seen sleeping in abandoned buildings, maybe even getting into trouble. I needed them to believe I was truly lost. I needed my wife to think she had broken me beyond repair. That way, when I came back, it would be the last thing she expected. And when I returned, I wouldn't be the same man who walked out of that house. I would be someone else entirely. Someone ready to take everything back. Days passed, then weeks. I kept my head low, making sure just enough people saw me to keep the rumors alive. I slept in shelters some nights, outside on benches others. The trick was to look lost, but never actually be lost. Meanwhile, Mason was feeding me updates. "Your wife isn't exactly in mourning," he said one evening, tossing me a sandwich while we sat in his truck, parked in a dark corner of a grocery store lot. I took a slow bite, chewing mechanically. "How bad?" Mason let out a breath. "She moved him in." I clenched my jaw. I knew it was coming, but hearing it still hit me like a gut punch. Just weeks. That's all it took for my best friend, the man I trusted, to slide right into my spot, to take my bed, my family, my life. And the kids? My voice was hoarse. Mason shifted uncomfortably. They seem fine. They're calling him Mike now. Real casual. Like he's been there forever. I looked out the window, my fingers digging into my palms. My own kids. My blood. And they were already adjusting, already accepting this betrayal as normal. She tell them anything about me? Mason hesitated. Not much. Just that you ran off. That you couldn't handle things. He paused. That you were weak. That word. Weak. The rage inside me flared. I had given them everything. A home. Stability. Love. And now, I was nothing but a whisper in the wind, a story their mother told to explain why their new father was sitting at my table. I forced myself to exhale, letting the anger settle deep inside me. I would use it when the time came. For now, I had more work to do. I wasn't actually broke. That was the part they didn't know. My accounts? Frozen, but still mine. Investments? Hidden under a secondary identity I had set up years ago. They thought I was out here rotting, scraping by. But in reality, I was still successful. Still calculating. And soon, I'd be more powerful than ever. Mason helped me get a new place, nothing fancy, just a small, run-down apartment under a fake name. From there, I started rebuilding. A new wardrobe. A new identity. A new me. I hit the gym, pushing my body to its limits, forcing out every ounce of weakness they thought I had. I studied. Learned things I never needed to before. The law, private investigation tactics, hacking. Anything that could be useful. Because when I came back, I wasn't just going to take my life back. I was going to destroy theirs. It was time to make my presence known. Not to them. Not yet. But to the world around them. The first thing I did was start leaking information, small, seemingly insignificant details about Mike. See, my best friend wasn't as clean as he pretended to be. And I was about to make sure everyone knew it. It started small, just a whisper in the right places. Mason had a friend who worked in corporate security, the kind of guy who could make problems appear where there weren't any before. A flagged credit report here, a suspicious transaction there. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would make Mike realize he was being targeted. But the real dirt? That came from digging deeper. Because Mike wasn't just some harmless snake who stole my wife. No, he had skeletons in his closet. And I was going to drag every single one of them into the light. Mason's guy ran a quick search, and just as I suspected, Mike wasn't exactly a financial genius. He had debt. A lot of it. Gambling, overdue loans, even a shady business deal that had gone south a few years back. He had barely been keeping his head above water before my wife let him into my house. And now he had access to my bank accounts. My assets. Or so he thought. I pulled the trigger on the first phase of my revenge by freezing every joint account I had with my wife. Credit cards. Cancelled. Mortgage payments. Suspended. By the time she realized what was happening, the bills would be stacking up. And Mike? He'd start to feel the pressure. Once the financial chaos started creeping in, I moved on to the next step, making my wife doubt the man she had replaced me with. Mason helped me dig up old messages, old emails Mike had sent to women over the years. A few from before he got involved with my wife, some even more recent. I sent them to her from an anonymous email. Subject: you don't know who you're sleeping next to. No explanation. No threats. Just screenshots. She wouldn't know if it was real. She wouldn't even know where it came from. But the seed had been planted. And once suspicion takes root, it grows like a weed. Up until now, everything had been subtle. Quiet moves in the shadows. But it was time for something louder. Mike had a job, some mid-level managerial position that barely paid the bills. Not impressive, but stable. The kind of thing a man like him needed to keep his fragile ego intact. So, I made sure he lost it. A carefully crafted tip to his employer, with just the right amount of evidence of misconduct. Nothing illegal, just enough to make HR uncomfortable. Enough to make them rethink his position. A week later, Mason called me. "You did it," he said. "He got fired today." I allowed myself a small smile. It was starting. Mike was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. Just like I had. And soon. He'd realized this was only the beginning. Mike was unraveling. Mason kept me updated, and every word was like fuel to the fire burning inside me. "He's losing it, man," Mason said over the phone. "Your wife's been arguing with him non-stop. The money problems, the emails, and now losing his job. He's starting to snap." Good. I wanted him desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. And his first mistake? He started drinking. I waited for the right moment. Then, one night, Mason called with the perfect opportunity. Mike had gone to a bar. Alone. Probably trying to drown his failures, maybe even looking for another woman to warm his bed now that my wife wasn't so enamored with him. I sent someone in. Not Mason, someone completely uninvolved, a local guy I paid in cash. His job? Record Mike making a fool of himself. It didn't take long. A few drinks in, Mike was slurring his words, ranting about how ungrateful my wife was, about how she doesn't understand what I've given up for her. He even got aggressive with the bartender when they cut him off. And my guy? He recorded every second of it. The video made its way online within hours. A drunk, washed-up loser, yelling about his married girlfriend while getting kicked out of a bar. Yeah. That was going to spread fast. The next day, I sent her another anonymous email. Subject: regretting your choices yet? Attached was the video. No message. No explanation. Just the truth. Within an hour, Mason texted me. She kicked him out. I exhaled slowly, my hands clenching into fists. It was happening. The perfect life she thought she had built with him was crumbling. And soon, she'd be left with nothing. Just like she left me. I had been a ghost long enough. Now it was time for them to see me. I got a fresh haircut, put on a clean suit, and walked into my old world like I had never left. The people who thought I was gone. They stared. My coworkers? Shocked. And my wife? Well, she was about to learn that I was no longer the broken man she abandoned. Because I wasn't just back. I was back in control. I walked through the doors of my old office like I had never been gone. The receptionist's jaw practically hit the desk. My former co-workers whispered behind their hands, eyes wide as they took me in. Because I wasn't the man who had disappeared weeks ago. I wasn't broken. I wasn't beaten. I was reborn. My suit was sharp. My posture unshaken. And the look in my eyes made it clear, I wasn't here to ask for anything. I was here to take back what was mine. I strode through the hall, ignoring the murmurs, heading straight for my former boss's office. I had left my position in chaos, letting them think I had cracked under the weight of my personal disaster. But now, I had leverage. I pushed open the door. Miss me? My boss nearly spilled his coffee. What the hell? Relax, I said smoothly, taking a seat across from him. I'm here to discuss my return. He stared at me, eyes flickering with hesitation. You ghosted us. Walked away without a word. I smirked. And yet, I see the company's been struggling without me. Contracts falling through. Productivity slipping. You don't need an explanation, you need me back. Silence. I leaned in. We both know you don't have anyone who can do what I do. So here's how this is going to work. You reinstate me, same salary, higher position. And in return, I shrugged. You get to save this sinking ship before it fully goes under. It took him a moment. Then he exhaled sharply. You son of a... That's a yes, I interrupted, standing. Pleasure doing business with you. I walked out before he could say another word. Step 1. Complete. Now, it was time for the real showdown. I timed it perfectly. I knew exactly when my wife would be leaving work. She'd be exhausted, frazzled from the mess I had thrown her into. And just as she stepped outside the building, I was waiting. The moment her eyes landed on me, she froze. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Hey, sweetheart, I said, voice smooth as silk. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You. She finally choked out. Me, I confirmed, taking a step closer. Surprised? Her breath hitched. You're not dead. I offered. Not homeless. Not broken. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Her lips parted, searching for words. And I let her suffer in silence. Let her mind race with everything she had done. Then, I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. I know everything. She inhaled sharply, eyes flickering with panic. You thought I was gone forever. I continued. That you could just replace me. That I'd just disappear while you and him played house. Her hands trembled. You have no idea, I whispered, what's coming next. Then, I stepped back, flashed her one last smirk, and walked away. Leaving her standing there, shaken, breathless, and knowing, deep in her bones. Her nightmare was only just beginning. She came looking for me the next day. I expected it. I sat in my office, reinstated as if I had never left, calm, waiting. And then, just as I predicted, the door burst open. There she was. My wife. Or rather, the woman who used to be my wife. Her face was pale, her eyes wild with desperation. You're back, she whispered, as if she still couldn't believe it. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. Took you long enough. She shut the door behind her, stepping forward. What are you doing? I tilted my head. What do you mean? Her breath came uneven. All of this. Coming back, acting like nothing happened. That smirk on your face. What are you planning? I chuckled. So now you're worried about my plans? I stood, walking toward her. You didn't seem too worried when you were wrapping your hands around his lap. Or when you let our kids call him their stepfather. She flinched, shame flashing in her eyes. Good. You were gone, she snapped, grasping at excuses. You ran away. You abandoned us. I laughed, an actual laugh, sharp and bitter. I abandoned you. I stepped closer, my presence towering over her. You threw me away. And now, when the little fantasy life you built is falling apart, you suddenly care. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't mean for. For what? I cut in, voice cold. For me to come back. For him to be exposed as the loser he is? Or for your comfortable little life to crumble around you? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Because she knew. She knew there was no justifying it. She reached for me, her fingers trembling. We can fix this, she whispered. I caught her wrist before she could touch me. The look I gave her made her freeze. Fix this? I echoed, my voice dangerously low. You burned this to the ground. And now, you want to pick up the ashes and pretend it's still a home? Tears slipped down her cheeks. I made a mistake. I smirked. Yeah. You did. I let go of her wrist. And just like that, she knew. There was nothing left. Not for us. Not for her. And definitely not for him. It didn't take long for everything to finish falling apart. Her finances. A disaster. Mike. Unemployed, broke, and drowning in debt. Their relationship. Over. She tried calling. Begging. Even the kids reached out, confused, torn between their mother's guilt and the father they had been led to believe was gone. I didn't shut them out. But I didn't rush back in, either. I made sure they knew the truth. I made sure they saw who had betrayed who. And as for my wife, she had to live with the consequences. Because I wasn't the broken man she thought she had destroyed. I had risen. And now I was untouchable.